This morning is our esteemed senior CDS staff person, Elizabeth Bowinger, and we will be talking about Tracking 101, all you need to know. Thank you. And Elizabeth, take it over.
Thank you, Kathy.
You're welcome.
So again, I'm Elizabeth Bowinger. I'm a senior community development specialist out of the Richmond office, and we're going to talk today about tracking. We require you to track a lot of things, and you will be giving that information to us at compliance reviews, at the annual reporting cycle in August, September, and when you close out your project. So it's real important that you start early in your project to do the tracking. So next. So we're going to start by taking a little quiz and seeing where everybody is and how familiar you are with our tracking requirements. So are you a ball of confusion? You have no idea what I'm talking about. For the first time, you've done one or two projects, or you're a hardworking man or woman and you're a pro at tracking. So if everybody could, yeah, put answers in the chat, Sherry says. Great, thank you. So we got a newbie. We got a pro. We got a semi-pro. That's great. Hard. So we seem to have a really great mix. So that's good. We'll talk about it, and hopefully by the end there will be no more confusion. Next, please. Okay. So why do we track? There are a couple of reasons. One, you have a contract that says what your national objective is. For example, the usual one is providing benefits to low moderate persons, and you have to show that you have achieved that. You have to show that the activities and costs are eligible under the Cdbg program, and that you have to show that you've complied with the other federal and state requirements, for example, like the fair housing requirement. And the bonus is that if you're doing the tracking as you go along, at the end, all this reporting that you're required to do will be easier. But, so next. So what do we track? We're going to be looking at the tracking requirements that are required for all projects. We're not going to be talking about those that are project specific. So for example, if you're doing IPR, you have to track finances by the client. If you're doing a downtown business, you might have to track facades or rehab, or you might have to track loans made under a micro enterprise loan program. We're not going to be looking at those project specifics. However, there's a bunch of handouts that we're providing you with, and the tracking samples for project specific tracking is included. So you have everything that you need for project specific requirements. And if you have a question about project specific requirements, you can either email me or you can talk to your community development specialist. Next. Okay, so we're going to start by looking at Cdbg expenditures. You have to provide us with information. Here is our sample that we use, that we give to everybody. And what we need to be looking at are the EDI information from when you got the funds deposited by the Department of Accounts. Invoice and information, like which invoice, what check, who the payee was, the amount, and then budget categories. And so you have a sample that you can use from us. If you want to use a different version, your own tracking, please talk to your community development specialist. And as long as we get the information we need, we're usually very flexible about allowing you to use a different format. Next, please. So for some of you, you're going to be doing what we call in advance remittance requests. And that means you're a small town and you really need our funds in advance so you can pay your contractor. with our funds as opposed to doing reimbursement. If you're a larger city or if you're a county, we expect you to do reimbursement. But one of the things that's tricky with doing in advance is that you need to make sure that you have spent the money you received within 5 days. And so you need to track whether or not it was spent within the number of days, or if it wasn't, that you've either returned the funds to us or if you've gotten our permission to retain the funds. Usually if it's just going to be a couple of days, it makes no sense for you to send us a check, because by the time we get the check, you need your funds and it's just too much work. So talk to your CDS if you need to hold the funds for a few extra days. And you also need to make sure that you don't have a balance that exceeds $5,000. So here you have an example where somebody is tracking this information to make sure that they're not going to get into trouble at a compliance review because they didn't disperse their funds in a timely manner, or they held more funds than they were supposed to. We don't really care what your method is of tracking. We just require you to do the tracking. Next, please. So one of the things we always say is that you have to track your non-CDBG expenditures in the same way you track your Cdbg expenditures. So here's a sample of what that looks like. So for example, if you look in the invoice column, you will see that I've circled invoices because they were all from the same invoice. And this particular invoice was not numbered by the contractor, but it was for a large amount of money that was then broken down by category. So it was for 3 different addresses, and the amount for each address was different because it was a waived building permit fee. And you'll see that explanation under comments. One thing that is new is that we're now asking you to give us information about the invoice period. So usually that's a calendar month. So in this case, it was a June 2011 invoice. Next. One of the big things you have to tell us is who your beneficiaries are and to provide us with information about those beneficiaries. So here's a sample for housing rehab, and it's been broken down by houses that have been completed, houses that are under construction, the application, and with the bid being prepared and then the application agreed. And you have to provide income information. You have to provide information about the number in the household and other socioeconomic information that will be have to be provided during the annual reporting cycle in August, September. And it also will have to be provided for in your closeout reports. Next. Oh, and here I'm just highlighting how this has been broken down. You don't have to break it down this way. I find it more informative, but again, that's just something you can work with your community development specialist. Now, the thing is that a lot of people think they only have to provide benefits for housing rehab, and that's not true. Next. For example, you also have to provide information if you're doing infrastructure. And here the big difference is the type of work. So before, under housing rehab, you would say, oh, this is a substantial, this is an investor owner rehab, this is an owner occupied rehab. And here you're breaking it down by sewer, water, streets, and storm drainage. And normally you'd be getting this information of who the benefits are from the application where you did your initial surveying. But you would also have to do benefit tracking, like I said earlier, by, for example, facade improvements, loans under the microenterprise loan pool. So every project type has some kind of benefits tracking, and you'll have samples for all the different types in your handouts. So take a look at that. Next, please. Procurement. When we do a compliance review, we're going to ask you for copies of your bid opening documentation. So here's a sample for a housing rehab project. Note that in the first column, you have to put in the cost estimate prepared by the rehab specialist. And this is important because we have a requirement that says if the apparent low, responsive, and responsible bidder came in plus or minus 10% of the cost estimate by the rehab specialist, you have to do a memorandum saying why you still would want to award a contract to somebody. And our concern is that sometimes people will underbid it, hoping to get the dollar amount up through a lot of change orders. And also because sometimes if the bid is way out of whack, it could be a good indication that somebody did not understand the bids, the specs, and you need to verify that they really knew what they were bidding for. And the other, so you can see at the last row in the sample, if you do it through Excel, it will calculate for you what the percentage is from the cost estimate. And so, you know, in this sample, nobody is 10% higher or lower. So the rehab specialist wouldn't have to do that memorandum as part of the contract award recommendation process. And the other thing you can see is they put in who was a no bid. So our requirement is that you want to have 4 bids. And one of the ways you show that you tried to get 4 bids is that you list everybody you sent the bid to and then show who didn't bid. So we understand that you can send the bid out, but you can't force people to bid. And so sometimes you may not have 4 bids for that reason, but you can show here that you had made an attempt to get the required number of bids. Next, please. So another thing you have to track are equal opportunity activities. And by that, I mean Section 3, which we used to call local businesses, minority-owned businesses, and female-owned businesses. And our sample divides it between construction contracts and consultant contracts. So here you see there are 6 housing rehab projects, and 4 of them have been awarded. You see the contract amounts. You see them as being whether they're a Section 3, a minority, or a female-owned business. Now, by Section 3, we mean they have submitted a Section 3 certification saying, yes, we certify we're a local. And again, we define that by being the community, the grantees community, and the county surrounding it, or the county the community is located in. And for minority-owned or female-owned businesses, it's just simply they're certifying that they're a minority-owned or a female-owned business. Now, sometimes, as we talked before, you're going to have other funding available, and you might do some of the rehab with IPR or home funds or some non-DHCD entity, but you want to claim them as benefits. So you would list those after you list the CDBG funded construction contracts. Next, please. So Melissa Mason is going to talk in depth on Section 3 reporting, but I want to quickly mention that you now have to record the number of labor hours for each activity, whether that's water, sewer, housing rehab. And you also have to now document and report on your Section 3 housing activities. Most of you have been doing that. You may not have been documenting it. You may not have been aware that you were doing it, but at least for everyone, you were required to publish an ad at the beginning during the pre-contract period, advertising the project to Section 3 businesses, again, your local businesses. And so you're going to have that as an activity. And The activities I usually see being reported are they're conducting outreach efforts to identify Section 3 businesses. They're providing technical assistance to Section 3 businesses so they understand your bidding process and how the whole CDBG thing works, or they're breaking down contracts to encourage Section 3 businesses to bid. And that might be, for example, you're doing a substantial reconstruction and you're going to separate the demolition and clearance, which would be then a smaller project, and hopefully then your Section 3 businesses might be more inclined to bid on them. Next, please. So Carlton has already talked about fair housing activities. You do have to track it, showing you've done one per contract year. And what we encourage you to do is go to the manual. We updated for the 2017 manual a long list of what I would call like pre-approved activities, activities that we have already signed off and said, yes, you can do it. So you wouldn't need to get our prior sign off. But some people will look at things that are not in the list and they'll get sign off. For example, we had a preliminary session at a governor's housing conference. In that session, the person talked about a book called The Color of Law, which talked about housing discrimination history. And the town of Smithfield purchased several copies for their library system, and we signed off on that activity. So do feel free to think outside the box and look at additional things than what's in the manual. Next. So because of COVID-19, a lot of people are looking at activities that are not necessarily involving the public. A lot of people are looking at putting information about fair housing and fair housing discrimination on their website. Again, the town of Smithfield has done that. They've had for a number of years now information on their website that will take people to the federal and state fair housing offices. You can access a discrimination complaint form. Now, this is acceptable, but remember, you have to be able to document that it took place. And so you're looking at doing things like taking a screenshot of the information. So here's a screenshot from Smithfield. But you also have to provide us with information like when did this information go up? If it's not a permanent addition, when it came down. So for example, you might have put stuff on your website for April, Fair Housing Month. So it would start April 1, but come down at the end of the month. And if you can tell us how many clicks were on the website, that would be great too. So just make sure that you're working with your community development specialist about the documentation you're going to need for anything posted on your website. Next, please. Another activity we require you to do, and you need to prove that you've done it, is the annual environmental assessment, where you do a reevaluation of your assessment. And it has to be done if there are significant changes are made to the original project, but also annually, regardless of any significant changes have been made. There is a form that you have to fill out. You can find it in the appendix. But I've also included it in the samples that are being distributed to you. So here you're tracking and showing me what you did. But just remember, again, if you didn't document it, as far as we're concerned, it didn't happen. So whatever you do, make sure you document it. If you got any concerns about what's an appropriate documentation for an activity, do talk to your community development specialist. Next, please. Okay, so this is my shameless marketing plug. In May, Kathy Boatwright and I will be doing a federal labor standards training. We're asking you that if there's anything in particular you want to see covered, that you email me or Kathy, or you can put the information in the chat, or you could also in the workbook put your questions. What would you like to see? And we're also going to be doing acquisition and permanent relocation, which does have a fair amount of tracking requirements. And we're going to be talking about that in September 14. So if you're looking at doing permanent relocation, please let us know what your questions might be. In the meantime, you can go to our website. There's a CDBG training archive. You'll find information there from previous webinars, and you also find a copy of this presentation, sometimes posted this afternoon. HUD's Exchange, if you haven't looked at it, has a wealth of information. It has lots of forms. It's got like the handbooks that they use when they monitor us, so you can see what HUD's going to look for in terms of paperwork. And they also have a lot of training. Obviously, your community development specialist can help you, but feel free to reach out to me if you got any questions that you think about in terms of tracking, especially like if you're looking at the samples that I've given you and you're not quite sure what you're supposed to do with a particular one or if it applies, feel free to reach out. So, Kathy, do we have any questions?
Yes, I was just going to say there was somebody that Christy Straight would appreciate information on the Davis-Bacon, like a Davis-Bacon primer for newbies. And
yeah, we'll definitely be doing
that's
one session that's just sort of the newbie stuff. And then we're going to be doing stuff for the frequent flyers about what they need to know where we're seeing problems. So yeah, we'll definitely be doing that.
Right.
Does anybody else have any?
There's no other questions as thus far in the chat.
Okay, well, thank you for listening. Again, reach out to us if you've got any questions about how to track for your project type. And with that, I'm going to turn this back to Sherry. Thank you, everybody, for your time and your attention.
All right, thank you. So just to follow up, Elizabeth, tracking is ultimately important no matter what program you're working on with DHCD. And what she has done is we're going to upload not only the PowerPoint, the presentation you all just saw, but all of the different handouts that go with tracking. There are 22 in the folder that will be uploaded onto our webpage later on today so that you can see not only the PowerPoint, but you'll have samples of the different handouts. So I want to say thank you to Elizabeth and Catherine. And it is 11:55. You guys were making great time. Let's go ahead and take a 5-minute break, and we will be back here at noon.